Today I'm going to make and test prototype parts that will convert my M42 Helios 40-42 into a real Nikon F-mount lens. The prototype is going to be 3D printed out of PLA on my filament printer, so it won't be the final version. I do expect to tweak this after testing, but this video is going to show you how to open the Helios and replace this part. So the lens will fit and work properly on any Nikon F-mount camera. By the end of the video I'll be ready to go out and test this lens on the camera for the very first time. But I'm not going to show you the results in this video. I'm going to wait for the next video, which will be all about looking at photographs. So if you only want to see the results, you can skip this video and look for video 3 in the series, or check out the link at the end or description. So without further ado, let's get started. First thing you're going to need when you disassemble this lens, because it is a partial disassembly, it's not a full disassembly, but the first thing you're going to need is a tiny slot-headed screwdriver. Now there's 6 screws in total, but on the outer bezel, on the end of the focusing wheel, we have 3 grub screws to take out. These grub screws are the equivalent of about 1.3 millimeters in diameter. But they're actually imperial measurements, and it's BA12 that you need to look for if you do need to replace them like I did. Mine were completely rusted. The ends had been rusted off, and some of them were really bad. I had to use a tweezers to get them out. But there we go. Job done. It wasn't as difficult as I thought. Those little grub screws, they screw into these little dimples, which are partially drilled holes into the surface of this aluminium ring. Now there are other screws on this ring that holds it in place, and we need to remove them too. So the other screws are towards the bottom of this ring. As you can see, in the factory they made some mistakes on this. So those are the top ones where the outer bezel connects, and this is down here one that's okay. So you can see that they're cleanly drilled there, but I don't know what happened to this one. I've heard the rumours about the Helios build quality, but I don't know, perhaps vodka had something to do with it. But anyway, it works fine and nobody can see that in there. So once we've taken those grub screws out, you just need a pair of calipers or a spanning wrench so that you can just nudge this, because it's not very tightly fitting, but it may be too tight for your fingers to twist off. Once it's loosened, just go ahead and loosen that all the way out. There's nothing in there to pop out at you, no springs or anything like that, so don't be worried. You can easily just remove this and put it to one side. You don't even need really to make a note of how far back the lens is as in relation to the helicoid, because it's not necessary. It's quite an easy lens to put back together. Now, pulling this off here, this is the part we need, but this helicoid here, that's the bit that we need. This tube, this metal tube. Essentially that's all it is, a tube with a flange at the bottom, a screw thread at the end, and a little groove on the inside. Now, the groove on the inside, I'll show you here, if you can see it with this blurry out of focus lens, is there. Now, all that does is help locate the positioning of the tube onto the helicoid. So there's a little dimple on the helicoid, and it just fits into that groove. And while you're there, you could actually use the opportunity now to clean the old grease off this and put some new grease on there. But I think I'm definitely going to do that with mine anyway. But there you go. It just fits over that little dimple, just to be aware of it, because sometimes you're going to find that there's a lot of grease there, and if you can't put this back on, it's going to be a bit distressing. But that'll be why. It's not very difficult. As you can see, it just slots in there and the screw threaded part clamps it in place. Now, this is the only piece that we need to look at, and this is what we're going to be replacing. Okay, this little assembly of parts, this visualization here, is what it's roughly going to look like. As you can see, you can probably recognize that tube from earlier, but with a Nikon bayonet there. Don't worry about the crosshair at the back. That's got nothing to do with the actual part. That's just something I use in the design stage when I'm looking for geometry on the actual surface of the thing I'm copying. So it just helps me relate to the design. The parts that we're really concerned with at the moment is those grey clamps on either side. Now they fit together against the tube and they're bolted in place with M2 bolts. And they're very small, they're tiny, and they're quite hard to see, but I know they're still bolts and they're still going to look out of place on the lens. That's something that might change as time goes on. I was looking really for something that was going to be easy to assemble, easy to make, and I think this fits the bill. It's simple and it's really, really strong. The difficulty with this is that if there's a diameter of a certain size around that tube, then the other components that we need to put on there first won't fit. So it has to be something, this outer sort of clamping system has to be done after. Now I could have done it as a screw fitting, but I think clamping it has a little bit more strength, especially when we're looking at plastic components. But anyway, that's something that might change. I'm going to 3D print this now, and hopefully we'll have some nice parts to assemble. So, with everything all loosened and ready to be replaced, I can just pick this off and move that to the side and replace it with this new, updated Nikon version. It's in beautiful red PLA. It's not going to make any difference to the testing though. As you can see, they look very similar. You can see the resemblance. So that just sits there in exactly the same place, and it should be clamped down in exactly the same way. So the disassembly should be exactly the same as the reassembly. There's no problems really, but there is one potential pitfall that you might come across. Now, it's an important one. It might give you a little heads up before we get there, and it's to do with screwing this little clamp down. Now, screwing this down is fairly straightforward. I mean, you can see the dimples at the bottom there, so you can see where they need to roughly line up to. But as we close this down, you can see the dimples disappearing, and it's hard to see. So the only way really to gauge where those dimples are, because you need them in the right place, otherwise the screw is not going to sit in there. You need to use something like this. It's a cocktail stick, and you need to find those little dimples. So with each screw hole, use the cocktail stick to find and make sure that there's a dimple underneath that screw hole. Now, there isn't a dimple underneath this one, which means I need to keep on moving this around until I can find a dimple, and there I have found it. And then now I need to check the other ones, the other screw holes, to make sure that there is a dimple underneath each one. And only when I know that each one has a dimple, that's when you can go ahead and screw this. They're tiny, these screws. They're even smaller than the other ones. Same diameter, but slightly shorter. Now, it's really tricky to video this and screw these in at the same time. So it'll be a lot easier for you to do this. But as you can see, having a magnet on the end of that screwdriver makes the job a lot easier. The 3D printed part has been sanded a little bit. That's why it looks furry. You see, the supports and things that come out of the 3D printer, they quite often make things look a little bit ugly. And just to make sure that it goes in, screws into the intended location, just a little bit of sandpaper, that's all you need. So it basically works. And I just need to attach this outer bezel. And to do that, I'm going to I have wound the coil out as far as it can go. So that would be infinity. And I just have to line up infinity to the top dead center on the lens. And I can actually see, I don't need to use a cocktail stick with this bezel, because I can actually see right through to the shiny silver dimple underneath. And once all those screws are in, I just need to test this out, try the focus to see if everything is okay, and then it's just simply a case of attaching the clamps on either side of that tube. And the screws, they're so tiny, they're M2 screws, and the bolts, even smaller, so fiddly. You have to have good eyes and really good dexterity with this. And as you can see there, I've taken out the spacers, the infinity rings, as I like to call them, and I'm not going to probably use them again. I'm not going to need them anymore. Now, this is a really fiddly thing to do, because you have to line them up just right, and then you have to get them tiny little screws. You have to get the tiny little nuts to fit on the end of the screws. So that might take you some time. But once you've done it, it'll look something like this. Now this is for testing purposes, and the red PLA shouldn't make a lot of difference to the light. You see, being red PLA, I can kind of imagine that you're going to get some light bleed in there, but it's quite dull. I'm not going to have a lot of sunlight, and I think it's just fine for testing. Now I just need to look for top dead center and line it up to the mark on the camera. And then I hear a click. Yeah, look at that. You can see that my lenses are quite scratched. That wasn't me. That was like that when I got it. So there is a little bit of play in that. And that's what prototypes are for. They're for ironing out all these little quirks. Now, it seems to be quite solid apart from that, which means that the play is caused by the thickness of the groove on the inside of that tube. So this thing, that just needs to be a little bit tighter. So the lens is ready, it's on the camera, and the only thing I've got to do now is go out and actually find a good location to take some shots. Now, I'm not going to do that today. I'm going to do that over the next few days. So I'm going to collect a few samples from a few different locations. I'm going to compare those images against one another. And there's going to be several days, so hopefully we will have some sunshine, hopefully we'll have some situations where swirly bokeh is induced, and hopefully we'll have a lot of interesting things to talk about. So if you've enjoyed this episode and you're eager to see more, hit that like button and the notifications so that I can update you as soon as I've done the next video. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.